Hi, Finny. Thank you so much for joining us today. So glad to have you.
Thanks, Allie.
Yes, so this is the founder of Sattler College. We're so happy to have you. Could you tell us a little bit about your exploration of, or your educational experiences that led you to start the college?
Sure. So I went to Caltech for college, which is in Southern California. And when I was in college, I was a student leader with InterVarsity Christian Fellowship. I also worked part-time for World Vision, who's out here today, and I also worked part-time in Christian radio. Through those years, I got deeply immersed in the modern American evangelical scene. I listened to literally hundreds and hundreds of hours of sermons. But by the end, I started to see the cracks in the modern evangelical world. So I'll give you an example. The internet came out when I graduated, shows how old I am. So this is like 94, 95. And like flies, the men around me were dropping to internet pornography. It was so sad. InterVarsity has a conference called Urbana. It's the largest student conference in America. 20,000 people go to that. And at Urbana, InterVarsity released a study that showed that over 80% of men who were active in InterVarsity had a regular problem with internet pornography. 80, and the number has not changed in the last 15 years. That should be alarming to us. I graduated from college, and then I moved to Boston to go to Harvard Med School, and there I did my MD, and I also did my Ph.D. in chemistry. While I was at Harvard, I lived in the undergraduate dorms, and I helped mentor undergrads. And for the first time, I got to see up close and personal all of the difficulties and the struggles and the challenges that college students are having in today's world. And so you saw that statistic that 70 to 80% of young people are losing their faith by the time they're in their 20s. But even those who hold on, I was very disappointed at the quality of their faith. It was something that obviously was weakening through this process of discipleship, this iron law of education that I mentioned there. That study that I quoted in the film there was actually from Harvard. They polled their own faculty, and they found that 1% of Harvard faculty, and which by the way includes places like Stanford and Yale and Princeton and all these top schools, would call themselves born-again committed Christians. So something is wrong. Something is very wrong. And the question that I have is, can we do things differently? Or are we going to do what Einstein said? Einstein said insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different result. Why are we sending our young people into broken models and watching this slow-moving train wreck happen? So that was the inspiration to start the college.
Thank you so much for sharing. Is my mic off? Oh, there you go. Thank you so much for sharing. Will you talk to us a little bit about your exploration of historic Christianity?
Sure, Allie. So I love to read, and as I was vexed by this problem that I was seeing very closely while I was at Harvard doing my graduate studies, I said, well, there's nothing new under the sun. Somebody has to have figured this out. And so I decided to read and to study. So I decided to read people from the Great Awakenings first, people like John Wesley, Charles Finney, Jonathan Edwards, George Whitefield. I went back into the Anabaptists. I went back to the Waldensians, went back to the early church, and tried to understand, somebody must have faced this problem before. How do we deal with it? Well, what shocked me, absolutely shocked me, blew me away, was that the people that we quote and look up today, if they were here speaking at Collide, we'd throw them out as heretics. We'd throw tomatoes at them and rocks at them. We'd say, get out of here. We don't like you. You're way too radical for us today. I guarantee you about this. So I'll give you just a couple of examples to kind of whet your appetite. This came from my studies of John Wesley. A lot of you know him. He was the founder of what's now called the Methodist churches. And there were passages that always bothered me when I was young. I don't know if they bothered you, but in Matthew, for example, it says, you who have 2 tunics must give to the one who has none. I read that one, and I read that passage one day. I looked in my closet, and I said, whoa, there's no way I'm qualifying to meet this. I've got like 7, 8, 9 tunics, 7, 8, 9, 10 coats in my closet. And here we live in the richest society in the history of the world, and we somehow kind of brush over that and say, we're not going to get near that. There's another passage in 1 Timothy 2, we were just talking about this earlier, where Paul writes, and he says he doesn't want people in the churches to wear gold, pearls, expensive clothes. And I said, whoa, what in the world? Like, that's pretty black and white. Wesley's got a whole bunch of sermons about how that's for the church to be followed, the Bible's to be taken seriously there. And somehow we just kind of brush all those things off to the side and say, that's cultural, that's not for us today. And over time, the church has moved away systematically from anything that's profoundly countercultural, and even if that involves departing from the Bible. And so I'm finding all this, I'm reading this, I'm pouring my heart and my soul into these studies, thinking something's broken here. Well, fast forward a few years, I decide to look and see if anybody's put this into action. And lo and behold, there's a small number of Christian communities, there's not one denomination that summarizes them, but probably none of you have ever seen this, where you go into these communities and they're actually living out the historic faith and taking the Bible very seriously. And you know what? Pornography in those groups, and I've done very careful studies of this, is basically at zero. Divorce is basically at zero in those groups. Faith retention of youth is off the chart high. You wouldn't believe it unless you see it. It's out there. I was Mr. Seasoned, InterVarsity, World Vision, Christian Radio. I knew the who's who, and I didn't know about this. But now that I've seen it and have seen the power of this transformative model, I'm convinced that for a lot of us, we just haven't even wrestled with these ideas. And if we can take them and introduce them, particularly at a young stage in the college years, it will represent a seismic shift in the way that we do education today.
Absolutely. That's amazing. Thank you for sharing that. Yeah. Will you share a little bit with us about what the foundation of Statler College is?
Sure. Yeah. So you saw the 3 C's there that we represent to summarize ourselves. So the first C is cost. So we're 80% less cost than the average private school in America. And in fact, students who get admitted this year, we're going to give them a year of free tuition. By getting a clean sheet of paper out, we were able to completely revamp the way that education is done. I could talk for a long time about that. Secondly, our core curriculum. So our core curriculum is very different than the core of every other college out there. So did you know, interesting fact, that every single college in America for the first couple hundred years required students show proficiency in Hebrew and Greek and Latin. And if you couldn't do that, you couldn't graduate. Every single college. Today, 0 colleges require that. Why is that? I would make the contention that our respect and esteem for the Word of God has gone down and down and down over the centuries, going from 100% to 0%. So we're literally the only college in America where everybody who graduates will have to do Hebrew, Greek, Old Testament, New Testament, apologetics, church history, subjects like that, in addition to liberal arts subjects, and we have majors like history and biology. There's plenty of time to spend on classes once you have this core developed, but most people don't even know, aren't even encouraged to develop this solid core. I've taught apologetics at Harvard since 2004 through InterVarsity, and there's a quiz that I give to students when we open up the year. It's 12 questions, and I ask questions like, give me one line about who Jeremiah is and what's his relationship to Ezekiel. Tell me what city Paul launched all 3 of his missionary journeys from. Tell me what happened in Galatia versus Philippi that made those letters so different. Give me one line about the book of Haggai and what's it about. These are Harvard students, brilliant people, born and raised in the church. Most people, out of 12 questions, which I consider all very basic, get 0 to maybe 1 or 2 of them right. Now, they know the Sunday school stories. They know David and Goliath and Daniel in the lion's den, but they don't know the Word of God. They haven't been grounded. That speaks volumes as to how we've failed to educate and ground our young people in the Word of God. Martin Luther used to say that the colleges and universities would become the very gates of hell unless they were places that grounded young people in the Word of God. That's a profound thought and a profound statement, and so our core curriculum we take very seriously in that. Number 3, Christian discipleship. We are requiring this 4-year program where everyone is going to be grounded in what does it mean to walk in purity? How do you overcome pornography? How do you successfully evangelize? How do you have accountability with one another? And when you graduate, you get a statement of Christian discipleship to acknowledge that in addition to your diploma.
All amazing. I wish that option was available to me when I was in college to come to your college. So I think that's incredible. Will you talk to us a little bit about how we can learn or read more, or how we can just engage with Statler College and the ideas that you're kind of throwing out?
Sure, absolutely. Yeah. So in addition to our website, and I hope you can go on and register for our blog, and we're on Facebook and Twitter and those kinds of channels. Most people, like I said, even who have been born and raised in the church and who have been very seasoned, haven't encountered these ideas, wrestled with them in any great depth. I will leave you with one final question here to maybe pique your interest. If I were to ask you to name 3 differences between the early church meaning like the first 300 years the church existed, the faith that was once for all delivered to the saints, and now, what would you say, and why does that matter? If you can't do that off the top of your head, if you don't know that difference, there's something that you need to learn and you should ask. So come to our booth and find out that question. What are 3 significant differences between the early church and us today, and why does this matter in ways that you can't even begin to comprehend? I'm convinced that we are leading a revolution in Christian higher education, and we invite you to join us in that.